The old house creaked. A low, mournful sound echoed from the attic. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside. Jackson sat alone, his eyes fixed on the flickering television screen. He wasn't really watching. He couldn't focus. Not anymore. Not since the whispers began. It started as a faint murmur, barely audible. He thought it was the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, but then the voice grew stronger, clearer. It spoke of things unseen, of tragedy waiting to unfold. It spoke of death. Jackson shivered, pulling his threadbare sweater tighter around himself. The first whisper, the first death. It had all seemed like a horrible coincidence. Now he wasn't so sure. The voice was back, and it had a new target. The image of Old Man Henderson flashed across the television screen. Local news. Found dead in his rocking chair. Heart attack. Jackson had known him for years. A kind, gentle man. He remembered the whisper, cold and sharp in his ear. Henderson, his heart will fail. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through Jackson's gut. He had tried to ignore the voice, to dismiss it as a figment of his imagination, but the death, so sudden, so specific, it lined up perfectly with the voice's chilling prediction. The house felt colder now, the air thick with an unseen dread. Jackson could almost feel the presence of something sinister lurking in the shadows, something that knew things it shouldn't, something that could control life and death. He tried to convince himself it was just stress, the isolation of the old house getting to him, but deep down he knew better. The voice was real. Days turned into nights, each one colder and more unsettling than the last. Jackson barely slept, haunted by the memory of the voice and the chilling accuracy of its prediction. He tried to distract himself, to find solace in the mundane routines of life, but the fear clung to him like a shroud. The townsfolk noticed his change. Their friendly greetings were now tinged with concern, their smiles strained. He caught them whispering behind their hands when he walked by, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and suspicion. He had become an outcast, a pariah in the town he had called home for all his life. The isolation gnawed at him, fueled the fear that twisted in his gut. He was alone, trapped in a nightmare that no one else believed. The weight of the secret, the burden of knowing what the voice was capable of, was slowly crushing him. He had to tell someone, to share the burden of the truth. But who would believe him? Who wouldn't dismiss him as a madman? The voice returned on a night thick with fog, its whisper slithering through the silence like a venomous snake. "Sarah!" it hissed, the name echoing through the empty rooms of the old house. "The bridge, she will fall." Sarah, sweet, innocent Sarah. Jackson had known her since she was a child, watched her grow into a bright and beautiful young woman. He couldn't let her become the voice's next victim. He had to do something, anything, to stop it. Panic surged through him, threatening to overwhelm him. He had to warn her, to keep her away from the bridge. But how? He had to make her believe him, had to convince her without revealing the terrifying truth about the voice. He knew he was running out of time. The voice had already claimed one life. It wouldn't hesitate to take another. The Miller family's home was a beacon of warmth and light in the fog-choked night. Jackson burst through the door, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to warn them. He couldn't bring himself to mention the voice, not directly. He begged them to keep Sarah away from the bridge, to keep her safe. The Millers were skeptical at first, their faces etched with concern for their friend. Whatever it was, they agreed to keep Sarah home that night. Relief washed over Jackson, a brief respite from the suffocating fear. The bridge loomed before him, a skeletal silhouette against the storm-racked sky. He had been drawn here, compelled by a force he couldn't explain. The voice had grown stronger, more insistent, demanding he meet it here. He stood at the edge, the wind whipping his hair around his face. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of menace. He could feel the voice's presence now, closer than ever before, wrapping around him like a suffocating shroud. "Why?" Jackson rasped, his voice snatched away by the wind. "Why are you doing this?" The voice chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down Jackson's spine. "You cannot stop what is to come," it hissed, its tone laced with amusement. "Death comes for us all, Jackson. You are merely a witness to its grand design." Anger surged through Jackson, hot and fierce. For too long he had cowered in fear, had allowed this voice to dictate his every thought and action. No more. He wouldn't be a pawn in its twisted game. "I don't believe you," he shouted, his voice ringing out into the night. "I won't let you hurt anyone else. I won't let you win." The sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the darkness that had cloaked the night. Jackson watched from his window, a sliver of hope flickering in his chest. He had survived another night, had defied the voice and lived to see another day. But the terror wasn't gone. It lingered beneath the surface, a constant, gnawing dread that refused to be silenced. The voice was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. He knew this was far from over. The voice had said it itself. He couldn't fight fate, but he could choose how he faced it. He could choose to live in fear, or he could choose to fight, to protect those he cared about. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, fraught with danger and shadowed by the ever-present threat of the voice. But for now he would cling to the hope that he had bought himself some time, that he had earned a brief reprieve from the nightmare. Jackson stepped out into the town, the familiar sights and sounds a strange comfort after the terror of the night. But something was different. A pall had settled over the once peaceful community, a sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. The townsfolk moved with a subdued air, their faces etched with worry. Their eyes followed him as he passed, a mixture of suspicion and fear in their gaze. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and unease. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside his window sent shivers down his spine. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched, that the voice was always lurking just beyond his perception. But the fear was always there, a constant undercurrent that poisoned his every thought and action. Weeks turned into months, and the town slowly began to heal. The whispers died down, replaced by cautious optimism. But Jackson knew the truth. The terror wasn't over. It was merely biding its time. He could feel it in his bones, a deep, unsettling certainty that the voice wasn't finished with him or with the town. The silence was just a prelude to something far more sinister, a gathering storm that threatened to unleash its fury upon them all. As he looked out over the town, a sense of foreboding settled over him. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. And this time he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was to come.